Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. I know it's been a little while. Today I'm actually going to share with you all my complete process for starting a painting. I generally need or really enjoy using reference photos for most of my drawings or paintings because I do like to combine sort of elements of realism with fantasy. So I like to have those realistic images in order to use as reference. I don't always necessarily copy the exact image, but I like to tweak them a little bit. So I use the Procreate app on my iPad. I will usually find images on Pinterest or on royalty-free websites, and then I kind of collage them all together in my Procreate app, and then I can tweak them, shapes, sizes, colors, etc., in order to create my desired final image. This also helps me do layouts, change, shapes, change sizes, get the best composition that I want, the colors that I want, all that stuff for the aesthetic that I'm going for. So I know this is a controversial approach, but I will often print and trace my image. If I don't trace it, I can use a grid to get an exact proportion, or I can just sketch it out if I don't want something exact. But honestly, this way is so much faster. It speeds my process along a lot. Some people may call it cheating, but I don't think it's cheating. I can draw. I mean, I went to art school for a long time. I know how to draw pretty much anything that I can look at. This just saves so much time. So when I do trace it, what I usually do is you could see one of the previous images I showed you was the back of my paper. I would print out the image from the Procreate collage, and on that piece of paper, I would just color in the back with graphite, and then you can put it on your paper and trace over it. So that's what I did. Once I have that image traced on, then I can go in and start painting. So I like to use a wet and wet approach on my backgrounds. When I'm doing a background, I like to start with the background of my paintings first of all, just because sometimes when you start with the detailed parts inside and then you go in with the background, it ends up bleeding in, or you might hate the background later and then you spend all this time doing all these details. So my approach is do like basic shapes, shadows, the big areas first, and then start sort of whittling in your little details as needed as you go. The wet and wet technique basically means you wet the areas with water that you want to paint, and so it kind of creates a bleed effect in with the watercolors. The colors can blend a little bit more easily. You get these nice like blur effects, and I really, really like those watercolor effects. So I went ahead and did that. I painted in the background, and then I will go in and start adding layers to my skin tones, especially if I'm doing a portrait, or my like other details if it's not a portrait. Generally speaking, I do a lot of portraits. So I'll go in with this basic skin tone. Now for this watercolor set, I'm using the Daniel Smith Basics set. So it's basically just primary colors. I've got 2 reds, 2 yellows, and 2 blues. And with these primary colors, with these specific colors, I can basically create almost any color that I would want for any regular painting. I do have a couple other colors that I added with like a really bright rose pink here that I'm using on the cheeks, and then like a metallic gold paint as well that I have from another brand, but because I just don't have those colors with Daniel Smith. The Daniel Smith watercolors are a little bit more expensive. They're kind of a higher end watercolor paint. They're very, very pigmented. They're extremely archival. They're basically a professional quality watercolor paint, so they're a little more expensive. I did get this set with these tiny little tubes on Amazon for about $25. So, I mean, they're not super, super expensive, but they're definitely higher priced if you buy the bigger tubes. They're like $13 to $20 a piece, so kind of pricey, kind of pricey. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm just laying out my values. So I lay out my values first. I did the values of the hair, I did the values in the background, some of the values in the flowers, and then I'm going in with the face, some of the shadowing, and the lips, adding those dark values into the lips because the lips are very, very bright. It was one of the brightest parts of the painting. So I wanted to get that first layer down. And you'll notice when I'm doing the skin tone, I don't really use any like peach or like flesh tones. I'm basically layering in different shades of orange, yellow, red, purple, because the skin has all these colors in it. I mean, you've got all the colors underneath the skin. You've got those blues, those purples, and a lot of times the shadows are really made up of those tones. So that's what I'm doing here. Going in with those shadows, making sure that I get all the layers in. So watercolor paint also requires lots of layers. It's very difficult to get the exact tone that you're looking for with the first layer that you use, because it does dry significantly lighter than it goes down when it's wet. So you really can't tell until the paint is dry what it's going to look like. The other thing is, if it's not completely dry and you go in over it with another color or more paint, oftentimes you get bleeding. So this could be a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, if you're painting wet on wet because you want the paint to blend together, that's one way to do it. If you want more of a hard edge and you're painting details, you really want to wait until your paper is completely dry before you go in with those layers. Same as if you want to draw over your watercolor painting with like pencils or markers or pens or whatever else. You want to make sure that that paper is totally dry before you do that, because otherwise you'll get a lot of tearing. So in here you can see I'm just adding layers and layers and layers on the skin just to make it look like it has that depth. Okay, so going in with some more details and making sure that, you know, everything is kind of exactly the way that I want it to be. So as far as this controversial approach of tracing, I just want to kind of go back to this. You know, there's a lot of people who out there, especially in the art community, who might say, oh, that's cheating. But I have to be honest with you, a lot of artists use this approach, especially people who are doing commissioned portraits or any kind of like realistic picture that, you know, a client might want it to be very, you know, resembling the actual human that it is, or the animal or whatever. Just because it does help to get quite a bit more detailed likeness, because those proportions are right there in front of you. You don't have to worry about measuring everything and eyeballing it and then tweaking all this stuff. So being able to trace and then go in with your values. And I'll tell you what, you know, if you're not a practiced artist, tracing is not going to help you. I mean, you have to still know how to render. You have to still know how to color match. You still have to know how to use your values and everything like that. It's really basically just the layout that it's helping you with. So there's that. So as you can see here, I'm actually going in and adding some of the details after the fact. I didn't trace the whole image of my layout just because there were a couple little things that I wanted to, you know, paint over. I wanted the background to show through. So I decided to add these moon faces afterwards. And then if you remember in the beginning, my reference photo had a little like white moth that I drew, but it was very sketchy. I didn't really put any details into it, but I will add that later as well. So I wanted that to kind of be a like lay over on top of the painting. So I'm going in with a white gouache paint for the moons. Gouache is sort of an opaque watercolor. It's a different kind of paint. It's kind of a cross between acrylic and watercolor. Acrylic paints, though, when they dry, they're permanent. And gouache paint, once it's dry, you can reconstitute it with water. So, you know, it can still also be thinned out, kind of like watercolor, but it's a little bit more opaque. Now I'm going in with my Prismacolor pencils and I'm smoothing out some of my edges and adding some more details and some more layers and just getting in some of those fine details that I was not able to get with my paint. So you can see over to the left there, I've got my iPad reference up so I can see what I'm doing. I can compare it, make sure the colors match if I want them to match. Sometimes I like to, you know, use my artistic freedom. Make sure I've got the values correct, and then also just smooth out some of those areas. Like I said, those edges of the watercolor paint sometimes don't blend perfectly well, and using my color pencils helps me to get some of the details in there. It also helps me to get more even depth of like shadows, to darken up some of those areas, and then also even to brighten up some other areas, you know, like if I need to use some more white to lighten some of the paint that might have gone on a little darker than I maybe wanted it to. And then I'm also using my color pencils to get the details in the flowers. The flowers seemed to be the most difficult part of this entire painting, just because I think because my reference image wasn't the greatest quality. I just got it from like a reference image from Pinterest, and then I ended up cutting it out and, you know, tracing around it and all this stuff. But the actual photo quality was kind of a low quality photo. So when I blew it up a little bit, it was a little pixelated. It wasn't super detailed. It was, you know, the edges were a little bit blurry. So my flowers aren't the greatest, but I went in and tried to add some of the details that I could with some color pencils, just, you know, try to make it look a little bit more like flowers, something you could kind of recognize. I did like this specific bouquet of flowers because of the colors that were in it. I really like the yellows, the reds and oranges, because I wanted it to contrast with the background, which I knew I wanted to be blue. You know, I wanted it to have like sort of a blue moon, blue sky, nighttime effect. And then, you know, her hair is blue as well. So I wanted to contrast. The contrasting color to blue is orange. So, you know, orange, red, yellow, they're all sort of in the same analogous color scheme there. And they work really, really well as a contrast to the blue background and the blue hair of the figure. When I did the moons, I also added a little bit of gold paint. It's like a metallic gold, which is kind of muddied here in the image because it was mixed with gouache, but I added some of that metallic gold as, you know, some of the craters and the shadows on the moons, I wanted to sort of give it a special shimmer, sort of. You can see it in person a little bit better, the metallic quality. But in the actual painting, it's kind of muddied up. But I mean, in the actual video, it's looks kind of muddied up. But that's okay. So yeah. So as you can see, the flowers and the bouquet are probably the most lengthy part of this process for me, as far as actually like rendering. I mean, I love the whole process of rendering. I love the whole process of painting, of coloring. You know, that's my favorite part of making art, of making this kind of art usually is the actual process of like making it come to life. So, you know, I like to draw pictures as well, but when I have an idea in my mind, I really love the way that that technology allows me to put an image together without having to draw it over and over and over again and change it 100 times, you know, to make it the way that I really want it to be. Here I am going in with white gel pen to do the little constellation details and the stars. I kind of had this idea of like turning her freckles into constellations, but I wanted them to be white to kind of, you know, to look more like stars. So I ended up going with gel pen because the gel pen is opaque and it can color over the watercolor. And I've got a couple of different sizes of gel pen. This one I think is the small one. It's like a 0.05, I think, from Jelly Roll. That's the brand, Jelly Roll pens. And then I'm going in and I actually looked up references for constellations as well, so I could actually use real constellations instead of just like making up random shapes, which is what I did for my reference photo. But I just wanted to make sure they were like real constellations and not just something strange and random. I did a little bit of outline on her hair because I didn't think that there was enough differentiation between her hair and the background. And then I went in and I outlined the crescent moon behind as well. And because the background kind of like blurred it all together. And then I went in with my white gouache again. I mixed it with a tiny bit of blue watercolor paint here just so that it wouldn't be stark white. I wanted it to be like sort of a very pale blue color. And then I sort of just filled in that moon to give it more of a contrast. And that way, you know, you could tell it's intentional. It's not just like blending in with the background or getting blurry. And then after I went ahead and did that, I realized that my blue background still wasn't quite as dark as I wanted it to be. I filled in those moons with a little bit more bright yellow too, because the gold just wasn't popping enough. And I outlined the moons with a gold gel pen. But I also wanted to go in and darken up my background. So I went and I got some more blue paint and I made it a little bit more pigmented with less water this time. And I just went in and kind of filled in those areas. Now this brush I'm using is a very, very, it holds a lot of moisture. It's like a calligraphy type brush, like a Chinese calligraphy brush. So it holds tons of water it's a lot easier for me to paint big areas with this kind of like a mop brush. So I don't end up, running out of wet paint before I get to the next area, which makes those weird harsh lines. So it kind of blends all together, and it made it a little bit easier for me to paint with that big mop brush. So here, yeah, I've got the background all darkened up. I like it a lot better now. Kind of looks a little bit more like nighttime. And then for the moth, now I don't know if you've seen any of my other my moth paintings, but this is kind of the same process I use for all of those to get a symmetry. So I sketch out half of the moth on a piece of tracing paper. And that's what I'm doing here. I just cut a piece of tracing paper the size that I wanted it to be, folded in half. And it's basically like cutting out a heart out of paper. I just draw one half. So you can see the design, I get the design exactly how I want it to be. I just draw it with pencil, and that way I can erase it and, tweak it a little bit or whatever. But I put it right on top of my picture so that I knew exactly how it was going to lay once I transferred it. And then I just sort of, draw out a little moth shape. So once I've got my shape drawn out here, I can unfold my paper and turn it over and fold it back again, and then I can trace the other half of the moth so they will match evenly. So there'll be a symmetrical design. So you'll see that in just a second. Once I open it up and flip it over, I do want to let you know, if you do this, make sure that you put a piece of white paper underneath when you are tracing the other side. Otherwise, it will rub that other side of the image off onto your drawing. So make sure you use a piece of paper underneath. Plus, it makes it easier for you to see through. So I used a piece of white paper here and just kind of traced it around and transferred it onto the other side. And this way, when you unfold that paper, you'll see it's going to be a whole moth. There we are. And I just kind of like darkened it up a little bit so that I could see my lines. And then the other cool thing is here, instead of using transfer paper like a graphite one, because there's a dark background, I got this white transfer paper from Amazon. I'm sure you can get it from any craft store or art supply store, but it's white transfer paper, and it's got this kind of like a waxy white texture. The shiny side goes down, which is the side that has the stuff that transfers. So I taped on my drawing where I wanted it to go so it won't move around while I'm transferring it. And I use an artist tape, so it's a low residue tape, so it won't peel my paint off or ruin my paper. And then I traced over my drawing with a colored pencil so I could see my lines that I traced over, and I make sure I don't miss anything. So once I've got that faint white line, I went over that with a white gel pen. I'm using actually my Uniball Signo? I don't know. Uniball Signo pen here. They're my favorite gel pens. They have a little bit thicker of a tip though, so if you want a really fine tip, you might want to go with the jelly rolls, but these ones show up super opaque. They're very vibrant, and I never have a problem with like the ball skipping, and they don't leak, and they're just really good pens. So I recommend these highly. I use my gold and silver one a lot too. I don't know why the stars part didn't record. I don't know. But anyways, I filled in the background with a little bit with some stars, just some little dots and some little star shapes, just to make it look like a night sky in the background. And then I'm actually using using acrylic paint markers to draw this sort of border line around it. I like to add borders sometimes because it helps to sort of complete the composition. I feel like it brings it all together. So I used a golden yellow and a red line because I wanted to take those colors from the flower bouquet and sort of bring it all together. And I just drew those on. I wanted the marker because I can get that nice straight line, and it's an opaque paint marker, so it works really well. And then my last thing that I did here was I went around with a black fine liner. I use a Tombow fine liner felt tip pen, and I outlined my flower bouquet. Now I don't always do this, but I felt like it needed more like definition, to help it pop out from the background. So that's what I did here. And I also like it because it sort of gives it that Art Nouveau sort of style, which if you know me at all, I love Art Nouveau. So here's the final finished painting. I did peel off the tape here so you can see that tape comes off pretty smoothly if you use the low residue kind. And here is the final piece. So thank you very much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you like this video. Let me know if there's anything else that you had questions about, or if you want to know any more about my processes, or if you want to see anything else specific in a future video, please leave me a comment. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.